your own ideas and counter the statements from the other side of the table. We are going to watch this complete, historic, and revolutionary speech from the Vice President of the United States at this year's Pronunciation Daesh conference. What happened to some of the winners of the Cold War? I look to Brussels, where EU commissioners are warning citizens they intend to shut down social media during times of unrest the moment they detect what they've deemed hate speech. Or to this very country, where police have conducted raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet. A day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government condemned a Christian activist for participating in Quran burnings that resulted in the murder of his friend. And as the judge chillingly pointed out in his case, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free speech do not, in fact, and I quote, grant a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most worryingly, let's look at our dear friend, the United Kingdom, where rights of conscience have put the basic freedoms of religious Brits at risk. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and army veteran, with the terrible crime of standing 50 meters away from an abortion clinic and praying silently for 3 minutes. Not bothering anyone, not talking to anyone, just praying quietly on his own. After British law enforcement saw him and demanded to know why he was praying, Adam simply replied that it was on behalf of the unborn child that he and his ex-girlfriend had aborted years earlier. Now, the officers weren't moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zone law, which makes silent prayer and other actions that might influence someone's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility a crime. He was ordered to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say this was a fluke, a crazy, one-off example of a poorly written law enforced against a single person. Last October, the Scottish government sent letters to citizens in safe access zones warning that even private prayer at home could break the law. The government encouraged reporting fellow citizens suspected of thought crimes. In Britain and across Europe, I'm afraid freedom of speech is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I'll admit that sometimes the loudest voices in favor of censorship haven't come from within Europe, but from my own country, where the previous administration threatened and intimidated social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Like the idea that the coronavirus probably leaked from a lab in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to speak what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, the Trump administration will do just the opposite, and I hope we can work together on that. In Washington, there's a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may not agree with your opinions, but we will fight to defend your right to express them in the public square, whether we agree with them or not. Now, we're at the point, of course, where things have gotten so bad that this December Romania just straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections, but I would ask my European friends to get some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media ads to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can even condemn it on the world stage. But if your democracy can be destroyed by a few $100,000 in digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is, I think your democracies are substantially less fragile than many people apparently fear, and I actually think allowing our citizens to express their opinions will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties from both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything people say, but when political leaders represent a significant constituency, it behooves us to at least engage in a dialogue with them. Now, to many of us across the Atlantic, it increasingly looks like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like disinformation and misinformation. They just don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion, or God forbid, vote differently, or even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure all of you came here prepared to talk about how you plan to increase defense spending in the coming years, some new target. And that's great because, as President Trump has made very clear, he believes our European friends need to play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think you hear this term burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together, that Europeans step up as America focuses on areas of the world that are in great peril. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think about the kind of budgetary questions if we don't know what it is we are defending in the first place? I've already heard a lot in conversations, and I've had many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend against, and of course, that's important. But what has seemed a little less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is exactly what they are defending themselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security pact that we all believe is so important? And I deeply believe that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guides your own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces now, the crisis I think we all face together, is one of our own making. If you are running scared from your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to achieve anything of worth in the coming years. We haven't learned that weak mandates produce unstable outcomes, but there is so much of worth that can be achieved with the kind of democratic mandate that I believe will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure chains of supplies, then you need mandates to govern because you have to make hard decisions to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You can't win a democratic mandate by censoring or imprisoning your opponents, whether it's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report. No. You also can't win by ignoring your base voters on issues like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges facing the nations represented here, I think there's nothing more urgent than mass migration today. And almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States as well, an all-time high. The number of immigrants entering the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, has increased much more since then. And we know the situation didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions taken by politicians across the continent and others around the world over a decade. Yesterday, we saw the horrors caused by these decisions in this very city. And of course, I can't mention it again without thinking of the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard too many times in Europe, and unfortunately, too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his 20s already known to the police, drives a car into a crowd and tears apart a community. How many times must we suffer these terrible setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the polls to open the floodgates to millions of immigrants. No. Checked, but you know why they did vote in England. They voted for Brexit. And agree or disagree, they voted for it. And increasingly across Europe, they are voting for political leaders who promise to end uncontrolled migration. Now, I happen to agree with many of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think people care about their homes. They care about their dreams. They care about their safety and their ability to provide for themselves and their smart kids. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my short time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple of mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all our nations don't generally think of themselves as trained animals or as interchangeable cogs in a global economy. And it's not surprising that they don't want to be relentlessly bossed around or ignored by their leaders. It is the job of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I think dismissing people's concerns, or worse, shutting down the media, shutting down elections, or excluding people from the political process doesn't protect anything. In fact, it's the surest way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and sharing your thoughts isn't messing with elections, even when people share their thoughts from outside your own country, and even when those people are really important. And believe me, I say this jokingly, if American democracy can make it through 10 years of Greta Thunberg telling us off, you can make it through a few months of Elon Musk. But what German or European democracy won't make it through is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and worries, their hopes, their pleas for help are not important or not even worth thinking about. Democracy is built on the important idea that people's voices matter. There's no room for blocking people out. You either support this idea or you don't. The people have a voice. European leaders have a choice, and my strong belief is that we don't need to be afraid of the future. You can accept what your people are telling you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do, you can face the future with certainty and confidence, knowing that the nation is behind every single one of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or the fancy hotels. It's not even in the big institutions we've built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful struggles will achieve very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Be not afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express opinions that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless.